Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. You all asked for a video about the books that I am reading, and here it is. The books that I'm going to be discussing in this video have directly contributed to my perspective on the world. And the reason why I read a lot of these books is because I wanted to perfect my ideas on sensualism, on art, living for beauty. And all of these books have helped me to continue my solidification of my views, my theories on life. The first book that I will talk about today is going to be The Beautiful and Damned by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I will paint a little scene for you. One day it was pretty hot. It was unusually hot for the fall, and I decided to go out into my backyard in a bathing suit and bathe in the sun and read this book, read about doomed lovers of the jazz age. This book is everything you could ever want. The book, like I said, follows two people that fall in love, they get married, and then it's an eventual disintegration of their relationship over time. And that's all fine and dandy. That's great. But to be honest with you, I read this book for one character and one character only, and that is Gloria, which is Anthony Patch's wife. Anthony Patch and Gloria are the two people that get married. And I read it because Gloria is one of the most incredible characters I have read in a book ever. She is unreachable, cold, merciless. She's this god of immaculate beauty, dressed in what he calls Alice blue. She's blonde. She's incredible. The descriptions of Gloria in this book are some of the most incredible descriptions of any woman. And me talking about this book is literally just going to be me reading some of the descriptions of her so that you'll read this book. And the reason why the relationship between Anthony Patch and Gloria disintegrates is because Gloria does not want to get married. She never wanted to fall in love in the first place. And this whole thing about Gloria not wanting to fall in love, not wanting to get married, is very much the mentality of the vampy women of the jazz age. So I think it was just nice to get a little bit of a first-hand look at how she's perceived by men. And of course, a woman like that is perceived by men as to be like this godlike, perfected, merciless character, which I love. The first page where Anthony Patch describes Gloria is going to be on page 57. The chapter is called Portrait of a Siren, and the subtitle is The Beautiful Lady. He says, "She was dazzling, a light. It was agony to comprehend her beauty in a glance." Already, we can tell that, first of all, Anthony Patch has the ability to see past just beauty, but that he understands that she is something he can't understand quite yet, which I love. The glow of her hair and cheeks, at once flushed and fragile, made her the most living person he had ever seen. Also, I think if you have read F. Scott Fitzgerald, then you know that every woman is kind of a step in for Zelda in his fiction. So I feel like he's really just talking about her the whole time, and maybe different facets of her personality. The descriptions of her are just unbelievable. Surely the freshness of her cheeks was a gossamer projection from a land of delicate and undiscovered shades. Her hand, gleaming on the stained tablecloth, was a shell from some far and wildly virginal sea. Again she spoke from the center of this pervasive illusion of her own. The sheath that held her soul had assumed significance. It's just like he talks about her like a goddess. Like she's just this unknowable spectacle. And of course he wants to possess her. He wants her to be his. And it actually says it in this book too, when I say that he wants to, like when a man wants to possess a very chaotic woman, I mean that because he literally he says it in this book. She was beautiful, but especially she was without mercy. He must own that strength that could send him away. When I say men want to conquer the unknown, there you have it. That's what I mean. I suggest that you read this book for Gloria, because she is a woman that I idolize. This book is also just great because I think that learning about the Jazz Age and learning about a decadent period in history, after all of the chaos that ensues from such a time period, I think it's nice to be able to read a book like this that was created from such chaos. I love it. The next book that I want to talk about it's called Dead Glamorous by Carol Morin. It is an autobiography, and this book is batshit crazy, to say the least. It is very, very much an autobiography to a gorgeous fault. I mean, like, the book, there's not one thing in this book that isn't ludicrous and completely over-exaggerated and fake. The whole book, I do not think there is like one thing in it that's true, but that's what makes it great. It's one of the most ludicrous things I've ever read. That's why I love it. It is so unapologetically dedicated to beauty and illusion and myth, it honestly deserves an award. Carol lurks within the dimension of beauty, of mirages, of fantasy. She is its Chanel-drenched soldier. And you see, even if this is like a false and sensational recounting of her past, even if every word in here is fake, the primary lure of such tendencies of the dedication to beauty and illusion is that you don't really care if it's fake. I truly commend anyone with the imagination and the delusion to amend their life in this way. I mean, reality is not enough. I do not have a physical copy of this book. The book I read online. I bought it online as an ebook, but I did write down some quotes that I want to share with you all. This book is all of the hysteria of glamour myths, and the main character is obsessed with film. Naturally. The characters are all, or real people, I guess, are all very vain, hedonistic, obsessed with their own vanity. Their deaths, they poeticize everything that they do and witness, and that sounds like a great time to me. The reason why I mention this book is because I think that there are way too many realists out there now. I think we need a little fantasy. I think we need some crazy people out there. Too many people today try to expose the ugliness of the world somehow to our benefit. And I think that Carol battles valiantly against that. So I'm just going to read some little pieces from there. Shadows provide a dusky hush, murking mystery into makeup and skin tone. Daylight disturbs your calculations, switching from brash to shade, suiting itself. In this, she's talking about makeup and talking about illusion and how shadows or light could either aid us or sabotage us. There's never a good enough reason to stop loving a memory. Right just in that sentence, she talks about how the past or things of the imagination are preferable to reality. Beauty is a thing too. She's obsessed with beauty and her own beauty. If you were never beautiful, does that make it harder or easier to be alone in the dark? Whether you sleep nude or in pale satin pajamas, lying down is always a rehearsal for death. Sleeping alone is terrifying because there's no audience. God, the invisible witness, never claps. There's vanity again. It's actually quite philosophical in that way, whether or not an audience makes you real. If you clap and someone isn't around to hear it, did you really clap? Did it make a noise? Then she says, forget all that rot about looks not being as important as the soul. That's exactly why they do matter. Your soul shows in your face. I mean, that quote just says pretty simply that beauty is unto itself, that beauty justifies itself, and that there is inherently some kind of deeper meaning or context in beauty, and that those who are vain or those that worship beauty, it isn't just surface level, even though we can talk about it in a surface level way. But I read this book for quotes like this because they are weirdly self-aware, no matter how materialistic she can be, no matter how vain she can be. Everything is very much calculated, theorizing about her own existence and about life. I love it. Now, Dead Glamorous leads us into a book of a similar nature, which is Au revoir by Huysmans. Yes, this is for all my aesthetes in the audience. This is the mysterious yellow book that changes Dorian Gray's life in A Picture of Dorian Gray. It's the one that he had rebound and copied in different colors so that it may suit his moods. Au revoir, or Against the Grain, I would say it's better translated as Against Nature. But this is the story of a superhero aesthete. A man so intensely contemptuous of ugliness, of society, of stupidity, that he actually makes the effort to literally go against nature into this like gilded, bejeweled, self-constructed paradise in an apartment that he creates. His name is Des Esseintes. He's the product of wealth and incest, very appropriately, which makes the whole Against Nature title even more literal. Des Esseintes is a very rare breed of human being. I think he's a hero and an inspiration. His goal in life was to experience the fine pleasures of sophistication as much as possible, come in contact with beauty and art at every second of every day. He also had a certain obsession with artifice as well. For anyone who loves beauty, loves art, loves artifice, like I do, like Des Esseintes does, this book is an absolute inspiration. It's a guide, really. It details someone who is the life of someone, the everyday life. This book is called The Book Without a Plot. It's literally just Des Esseintes making this abode of his home, and him talking about literature and art and having these really, really intense, scary visions and moments of psychosis where nature kind of creeps in, but more on that later. This is a book detailing the life of a man who is so intensely adamant on the curation of everything that he experiences and perceives. But this book is also a cautionary tale for people who follow art too closely. Des Esseintes literally sends himself into insanity because his tastes become so refined that his temperament is more fragile each day. He literally wants to die just by brushing up against somebody on the street. This book also makes no secret of the like decay-like qualities of art and what I have described as decadent. The prose starts to take on a more morbid and kind of obsessively gory disposition as the book goes on. Let's say here, the interest that Des Esseintes felt in the Latin language remained as strong as ever. Even now, when rotten through and through, it hung a decaying carcass, losing its limbs, distilling its pus, barely keeping, in the utter corruption of its body, a few sound parts which the Christians abstracted to preserve them in the salt pickle of their new dialect. A lot of these chapters are him talking about the Latin language, about writers, philosophers, art, all that. But above all, Des Esseintes believes that artifice is the highest of all human creation. He says here, in quote, "To tell the truth, artifice was in Des Esseintes' philosophy the distinctive mark of human genius. As he used to say, nature has had her day. She is definitely and finally tired out by the sickening monotony of her landscapes and skyscapes, the patience of refined temperaments. When all is said and done, what a narrow, vulgar affair it all is. Yes, there is no denying it. She is in her dotage, and has long ago exhausted the simple-minded admiration of the true artist. The time is undoubtedly come when her productions must be superseded by art." So artifice is an amendment on reality, or a distortion of reality created solely by a human being, and that it is separate from nature. Des Esseintes believes that, I guess in so many words, that human life can be improved upon. I don't think we need to be animals anymore. The greatest achievement of man, like I've said before, is art. And while the ending is terrible, really, he goes so insane he actually has to go back into society and out of his solitude. But as far as the effort goes into trying to curate your life so much, to be in contact with beauty at all times, I think that this was a great book for that, and inspiration for that. The next book, I guess it isn't really a book, it's more of a collection. I want to talk about is petite poems and prose, which is small prose poems. Here I have 20 prose poems. This is just a collection of poems from small prose poems. However, I am not here to recommend Baudelaire to anybody here for his poetic mastery, because I do not understand poetry enough to do that. I recommend Baudelaire for anyone who wants to read anything from a man who adored beauty. He was an aesthete, he was a dandy. And even if you don't know a thing about how he writes, the structures of his poems, the meter, the rhythm, all that stuff, I would assure you that even a surface level reading of Baudelaire's prose poems is good enough to start. There's a lot of grit in these poems. There's a lot of teetering back and forth between shame and pride, between squalor and imaginative richness, fantasy and reality. I chose to remark on Baudelaire because Baudelaire is one of our forefathers, one of the men who sought beauty and became a martyr to it. And when I say our forefathers, I mean, I'm talking to all of my beloved subscribers out there who are sensualists, aesthetes, those who live for art and beauty. I'm referring to you all and to anyone who aspires to be like that. These prose poems are few and far between. They were written in the last decade or so of his life. And the reason why these are so important to beauty and to art and anyone that is an aesthete is because during these last few years of his life, Baudelaire was at his lowest. He was dying of syphilis. He pretty much squandered all of his inheritance and was living in absolute squalor. And he was hopelessly addicted to opium. And you see, opium is a very, very important drug to understand, especially when it comes to this time in history as well as later. Opium was the drug of dreams. Opium, if you watched my one video, Living a Slow, Sensual Life, I read a poem that a subscriber had sent to me, and it's called The Double Room. And The Double Room, it's actually in this collection of prose poems. It talks about doing opium in this beautiful fantasy world that it takes you to, as well as the fall from it and what it feels like to come back to reality and to not be high anymore. Opium was that dream drug for artists. It provided inspiration, hallucination, dreamlike images, which were all just this idyllic world that they wished they could inhabit. And Baudelaire wrote about those visions quite a bit because the drugs, the opium, which he took laudanum, which laudanum has opium in it. But poets that wrote about opium and the visions that they had on opium, this was this idyllic, perfect world that they wanted to live in. And it ended up killing a lot of people, of course, the addiction to it. They were addicted to this drug for a reason, not just because it was addictive, but because they were addicted to that vacation into their mind. It's this kind of free-flowing state, and they would be able to create and write or paint or whatever it may be, have conversation, or just lay there in bliss. So, like, that state is really what we're all trying to achieve, and I think it's important to read somebody who wrote about that feeling so accurately. As far as those prose poems, I chose to read them because I was researching prose poetry for my own writing, and I wanted to know what prose poetry looks like from somebody that knows what they're doing. Prose poetry is something that doesn't have any of the structure of poems, but it reads like a poem. It's surrealist. It has like the imagery that poems do. But it's interesting because Baudelaire, even in his genius, did not believe that he succeeded in these poems. And I understand why. When you read them, you'll understand what he meant. They were an attempt. Again, I think it was very valuable to try. I think the one person that was able to really write a prose poem effectively was Anais Nin in House of Incest. And it is a miracle of a prose poem, I'll tell you. But anyway, Charles Baudelaire, everyone. Dandy and aesthete, one of our forefathers. This is somebody you need to read. Anything that he does. Read it. The last thing I'm going to talk about is Break, Blow, Burn by Camille Paglia. I've talked about this book very briefly before. This is a book that I recommend to people who are interested in poetry but have no idea They don't know anything about it. I know next to nothing about poetry, which is why I bought this. If you've been following me for a while, you will know that I adore Camille. And after the success of Sexual Personae, she decided to use her success not to write about politics, for which she was very known, but she used that success to make this book, which is 43 of the world's best poems. She reads them. They're in here. They're singled out on a single page. They have a page to themselves. And then she discusses them and dissects them. And I think there's a really great little quote in here where she talks about Theodore Rothko's The Visitant, the poem The Visitant. She describes so perfectly really what poetry is or how it started out. She says here, "The Visitant charts the genesis of poetry from a spontaneous moment of heightened perception and sensory awareness to the birth of rhythm and the regular breathing and lowered heart rate of sleep." Camille is just one of those people that is able to see something and to dissect it, to crack it open to its nucleus and understand it at that fundamental level. To be able to talk about poetry like that, it's just like she understands it so perfectly so as to be able to describe it so simply. It's just, I absolutely adore her. Even though Camille can be thick, like her writing can be pretty difficult to read and get through, I will say she really, she dumbed it down for us quite a bit. Her writing is a lot easier to read in this book, and she spoon feeds you, and I love it because you need that in the beginning. You need that amount of that nurturing, I guess, in the beginning when you're learning anything. And especially to do it for the world's greatest poems, it's wonderful to have this as a resource and to have one of my favorite people, I think one of the most intelligent women to ever live, to be the one to guide me and anybody else who reads this into the world of poetry. I think it's just absolutely phenomenal. So those are the lovely, lovely books that I have for you today. I apologize if I sound a little scattered. I didn't really script this video very much, so my brain is just really all over the place. But I hope that any one of you at least has enough trust in me to read these based off of my recommendation, because I promise you they will not let you down. None of these books will. Especially if you are an aesthete, if you are an artist, if you appreciate beauty, every single one of these will blow you away. Even if it's just a quote, one little quote, one passage, one chapter in there that will make you stop and look out into the sky in awe. It's worth your time, I promise. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you guys were happy with it. I was very happy to share with you guys the books that I had been reading. It just takes me a while to make a video like this because I pick up books and put them down a lot. So it takes me sometimes years to read a book in its entirety. But yeah, these are some of the most recent ones. Feel free to please leave any of your recommendations in the comments. Let me know if you bought these books, if you read them, what you thought about them. It would surely help anybody else that was skeptical about these books to influence them to read them. And yeah, I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.